Is it possible that the SEC could look to say goodbye to the NCAA altogether? Let's dive into that coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
If you've noticed, my voice is a little bit different. I've been fighting a cold. That's why I was not on the Friday show with Jay. But yeah, just been battling a cold for the last, half a week or so. But here, the show must go on. Jay is traveling for work, so we're going to make this work today. So thank you for bearing with us and making Locked On Sooners your first listen. Matt Hayes over at USA Today Sports wrote a really interesting article in the wake of the Trinidad Chambliss decision down there in Mississippi. And you could even throw the Joey Aguilar decision down in Tennessee into the conversation as well. The differentiation and the inequity that we see in eligibility decisions from the NCAA, along with the ongoing debate and dichotomy of opinions between the SEC and the Big Ten on the future of the playoff, has Matt Hayes over there at USA Today Sports wondering if a breakaway from the NCAA would actually be in the SEC's best interests. Now, this sounds crazy. It does feel at some point we're going to be in this big P4 Super League, and the SEC is going to very much be a part of that. But the SEC just separating itself from the NCAA altogether just feels wild. But here's what he had to say, really. And as absurd as it sounds, basically saying, what if the NCAA ruled or went on to fight and appeal the Trinidad Chambliss decision, and Ole Miss and the SEC to say, hey, you know what? We're going to let them play regardless, and we don't really care what the courts say. What are they going to do? He argues that the remaining 15 SEC members, or even a majority, may actually support Ole Miss and its fight against the NCAA, may take a stand too, because they want the ultimate payoff, a league of their own. No more bickering with the Big Ten about some dopey 24-team playoff. No more adhering to make it up as you go along enforcement from the NCAA. Just the SEC, its own rulebook and television partner, and a fat revenue generating playoff of its own. His discussion basically saying, because the NCAA can't seem to get eligibility right, because the Big Ten is grasping at straws for a 24-team playoff, and because the SEC has a significant media partner in its back pocket, do they really need the NCAA? Could the SEC decide, hey, listen, crowning an SEC champion is just as significant as crowning a national champion? Now, there'd be a lot of discussion about that and a lot of naysayers, especially considering the Big Ten has won the last 3 national champions. There'd be maybe some discussions about how the SEC is afraid of the Big Ten. That's not going to be the case. The SEC would line up and play against the Big Ten every single day, every day of the week. And that's not going to be an issue. But what I find interesting here is some of the details that Matt goes into. The SEC could create a 6-team playoff at the end of their schedule and crown an SEC champion. They could create an SEC only schedule where you play your 7 opponents, or create more divisions. You play your 7 in division and then play 5 from the other division, rotating every year. So you're playing a 12-game SEC schedule, and then you play a 6-team playoff. How much more revenue could the SEC make? That's part of the reason they went to a 9-game conference schedule altogether, was because, not necessarily just because of the Big Ten pressure, the Big 12 pressure to go to 9 games, but because Greg Sankey, SEC administrators believed, hey, this is going to get us a little bit more money in our back pocket to help fund our programs, to help create more competitive rosters. Excuse me while I take a drink. And the SEC would ultimately be a big beneficiary of just playing themselves, not having to worry about non-conference inequities. Would this actually happen? No, it's very unlikely. I don't see a scenario in which the SEC breaks away from the NCAA, in large part due to Greg Sankey having said it at different times in the past. They want to maintain a level of collegial responsibility to the game by interacting and engaging with the Big Ten, the Big 12, the ACC, the Group of Five, Group of Six now, about the playoff. The SEC doesn't want to just say, hey, it's our way or no way. It's the Big Ten's way or no way. SEC, Big Ten, Tony Petitti and Greg Sankey have all the power in the playoff discussion, but they want to include the other decision makers that are a part of the playoff committee. They don't want to just, ram a playoff decision down everybody's throats. They want this to be what's good for college football. I've seen Greg Sankey mention that on a number of occasions. The other part of this where I find it to be a little far-fetched is what happens to some of these great rivalries. South Carolina, Clemson, Florida, Florida State, Florida, Miami, Georgia, Georgia Tech. What happens to those if the SEC goes to an SEC only schedule? Well, those games would go away. So I as interesting as Matt Hayes' idea is, and maybe as fed up and frustrated with college football as SEC members might be because of the NCAA, as fed up as they are with the NCAA as they might be, I just don't see this being a realistic end to what happens in the future. I think what's more likely is you see a big super league come to fruition where it's the SEC, a number of members from the Big Ten, several members from the Big 12, and they create a league that operates maybe outside of the NCAA and crowns their own national champion. But I don't see a scenario in which the SEC just fully breaks away. That seems really unlikely, but it's an interesting idea. I know that as part of the 2014 playoff, part of the discussion is having a 4-team conference playoff to help guide the 2014 playoff, if that makes sense. But it's all still a bit of a mess, and these conferences still have a lot to figure out as far as, playoff scheduling goes, figuring out the calendar and having the season actually end within a reasonable time frame, figuring out the transfer rules and eligibility rules. All of those feel like bigger issues than playoff expansion. I think playoff at 12 teams is just fine. Figuring out eligibility issues, figuring out the college football calendar, those are bigger issues to me than the playoff, than this future super league that people have theorized about. They've got bigger fish to fry. But the NCAA needs to lock in and figure out some better rules so that programs, schools, players can operate with a lot more clarity than what everybody's operating under right now. I mean, we're still waiting on an Owen Heineke decision. It's February 22nd. The NFL Combine is coming. I don't think it's likely that Owen Heineke returns to college at this point because we haven't heard anything. But we shouldn't have to wait this long on a decision.